Hey, what's up, guys? I scored my first Vic 20. Picked it up at a yard sale. 50 bucks. Let me show you what I got with the computer. I got some games, a couple other accessories. Let's take a quick look at it, and then let's dive into the Vic 20 and take a first look at it. Don't go anywhere. So I was cruising a little yard sale this weekend, and I happened to come across this Vic 20. Nice and packaged in its original box, albeit a little beat up. So I decided to go ahead and create a deal and picked it up for 50 bucks. And the person selling the computer actually threw in this old school 1970s answering machine made by Panasonic. Maybe we could look at that at another time. We'll put that to the side. But in any event, did pick up the Vic 20 for what I thought was a decent price. Maybe you guys could tell me if I got ripped off or not, but I think 50 bucks for a working Vic 20 with some cartridges and some couple cassettes and a cassette player wasn't a bad deal. But you guys can let me know. So got quite a few bit of games here. I'm gonna just crack each one of them open and take a look at which games we got. Looks like the first one here is Submarine Commander. Don't know if that's a good game or not. I guess we're gonna find out. The next one we got, River Rescue. Again, you guys can tell me better or not if it's a good game or not. I guess we'll have to load it up and play it and find out. Atlantis. I remember playing that on the Atari 2600. Don't know if it's the same game, I assume. Not really sure what's on this cartridge cassette, but we'll have to figure that out after. Maybe we can load it in the cassette player and see if there's actual programs on it. Star Post, another cartridge from Commodore. And this one is Visible Solar System. Comes with a nice color brochure with it. Shows you how to play the game. We'll have to take a look at that game and see what it's all about as well. This is the owner's manual for the 1530 data cassette unit. And another cassette, Snakefield. Sounds like a game. Some kind of a manual for using cartridges on the Vic 20. Or instruction sheet, should I say. This was a bunch of different little mail-ins, coupons, offers for magazines and for games. This one here is for 44% off electronic games. Some kind of a random basic source code printout. Not really sure what this program does. Maybe we'll try and type it in and see if it does something cool. This is a brochure from Imagic for video games for the Atari video game system. Not sure where that came from. Somehow it ended up in this box. Must have had an Atari 2600 at the time that they had the Vic 20, whoever I bought this from. Imagic Electronic Games Magazine, 44% off. Another ad. I wonder if anyone out there has copies of this magazine still floating around in their closet or in their basement somewhere. So here's another cartridge, Dragonfire. Sounds like a game. This looks like a left-right audio cable. I'm not sure if this came with the Vic 20 or not, but I guess we'll find out if we can use it or not. Here goes the stock power brick that came with the Vic 20. It's a pretty beefy unit, and obviously I'm going to test this before we just plug it into the computer. It's looks like original Commodore. 5 volts DC, 9 volts AC. We'll test that sucker out, make sure that it works properly. Next up, we've got the RF modulator unit, which plugs into the 5-pin video port of Vic 20 and gives you an RF signal out that would typically go to an RF modulator to an old-style TV. I don't think we're going to be using this, but it's good to know that we have it, just in case we ever want to resell the computer and package everything that came with it. Looks like we've got a standard Atari style 9-pin joystick. I'm not really sure what condition this is in, but we'll go ahead and clean it up and test it out, see if it's even worth salvaging. Next up, here's the cassette recorder slash player. This is actually the Commodore unit that's, I believe this was actually pretty unique in its time. It's digital. It connects to the cassette port on the back of the VIC-20. There's no audio or volume settings that have to be done, and it's pretty reliable from what I've heard. So we'll go ahead and plug that in and see if we can get the couple programs we have on cassette to load up and run. We'll also see if we can save some basic programs that we type into it. And last but not least, here is the VIC-20. All dirty and grungy. Looks like it's been stored in a box in a garage for 20 years. Who knows? I hope this thing works. We're going to go ahead and give it a quick cleanup. And there you can see the joystick port, the power supply, the power plug. There's the video and the cassette port, the cartridge port. It's pretty dingy. I hope this thing works. We don't want to get into a lengthy repair. So let's go ahead and take it to the lab, clean it up, plug it in, see if the damn thing works. See if our 50 bucks is well spent, or if we're going to spend a year restoring this pig. So one of the first things I wanted to do was test the power supply to see if we're getting our AC voltage and our DC voltage. It looks like in the AC legs we're getting about 10.5, 10.5 volts AC. It's a little bit higher, about 1.5 volts higher than what it's spec'd at, but I don't think that's going to be an issue. Most of these old power supplies run a little plus or minus on the AC side, so I think we're going to go ahead and run with that and let it go. On the DC side, we're a little closer than where the AC was, 5.2 volts, which is pretty good for a 5 volt DC line. So I think we should be fine with that. As with any good cleanup job, let's go ahead and start with the power supply and make sure it's got all the gook erased off of that. Had a little bit more of a challenge on the actual VIC-20. There is some what appears to be 20-year-old Scotch tape cemented to the top of it, along with years of just oil, dirt, grease, glue. So I started with the basics. We're just going to scrub it down with some Windex, and then we're going to slowly work our way to using some sort of a goof-off cleansing agent, and then ultimately we're going to use some denatured alcohol to finally get that final scrub off. I'm probably not going to go through any type of retrobriting process, as I'm not too concerned with this thing looking like it came out of the factory. But we do want to make it as clean as possible, so we'll go ahead and do what we can to scrape the tape off and get all the gook off of it, obviously. Make it look presentable. Now, cleaning up this VIC-20 is a labor of love for me. Anytime I can take something old that's really a part of history and that was really cool, and it's still cool at this time, I mean, I just enjoy fixing it up, cleaning it up, restoring it, bringing it back to its working state if it's broken. If you haven't already done so, I highly recommend that you try this. Get something that you like that's old, something that you used when you were a kid. I don't care if it's a game system or a computer or a remote-controlled car, whatever it might be. Go ahead and grab it. See if you can get one that's in old condition and needs to be restored, and take your time and go through and put the love and effort into it and bringing it back to its original state as close as possible. It's really an enjoyment. It's something you'll be proud of when you're done. And it's something you can teach your kids and you can pass on to the next generation about what we used and what we grew up with as far as the technology and some of the tools that we used in the game systems. So as you can see, just taking my time and just going over and over the same areas on the computer and the plastic with different types of cleaning solutions. WD-40 is a solvent. It's good for breaking up the gooey, rubbery stuff. Goof Off is another good cleaner to remove sticky residue and types of stickers and things that have been placed on the computer. Denatured or isopropyl alcohol is good for removing the dirt, the grime, the fingerprints, the oils that have been left over time. If you combine all these together and just take your time, you can get most of the dirt and the grime out of the plastic without having to do any type of hard scrubbing or any type of sanding or anything that might damage the original plastic itself. So just take your time and work it slowly, and eventually you'll get it cleaned up to the point where it's presentable and usable. Well, now the machine is clean, what can we actually do with it? Well, for one thing, we can use cartridge-based programs that go into the back of the VIC-20 to run games and software programs. Let's go ahead and plug our power in to the VIC-20, which is located on the right side of the keyboard. This is a newer style DIN plug on the model that I have. Let's also go ahead and plug in our Atari compatible, VIC-20 compatible / C64 compatible joystick. Ironically enough, the video cable used on the Atari 800XL and 130 series computers also has the same pinout as the VIC-20. The other option we have is to use the good old-fashioned cassette deck for loading our programs from BASIC. I went ahead and plugged in the cassette deck into the cassette deck port, and it's pretty easy. It's just a simple plug. You don't have to actually attach the grounding wire. We'll go ahead and put our cassette in. Next, we boot the VIC-20, and once we come up to the ready screen, we're going to hit the Shift Run Stop keys, and that puts the VIC mode into load tape mode. All you have to do is press play on the tape recorder, and it should start to load the program. We ran into a little difficulty. The tape recorder was not running, it wasn't recording, it wasn't playing, it wasn't rewinding, it wasn't forwarding, almost as if it wasn't receiving power. So I decided to go ahead and do a little troubleshooting to see if I could figure out what was going on. I figured I'd go ahead and check the voltage on the cartridge port. There's supposed to be 5 volts on pins 1 and 6. And it looks like the voltage is there. It's a little low, but it should be enough to run the recorder, so not really sure what's going on with this guy. So I decided to take the cassette recorder apart and see if there's anything obvious that might be broken or something that we can repair easily. The recorder comes apart easily enough with 4 screws, and then there's 2 more screws that holds the small PCB in place. There's 2 small wires that use a switch that's able to tell the recorder when you press the play button. This is what tells the VIC-20 to actually begin turning the motor drive circuitry. Let's do a quick check and make sure the board is receiving the 5 volts from the VIC-20. It looks like the 5 volts is getting to all the ICs, so I don't think there's a problem on that side. Now, according to the Wikipedia document, pin number 3, C3, is the motor control, 6 volts that runs the actual motor in the cassette player. So just to confirm we were getting that 6 volts, I tested the actual point on the board and was not able to get that 6 volts no matter what I did. So as a quick test of the motor, I decided to connect the 9-volt battery directly to the motor just to see if it would spin. And sure enough, it does spin. So that tells me that at least I know the motor is good in the cassette unit. So at this point I felt pretty confident that there was nothing wrong with the data cassette unit itself. So I decided to go ahead and button it back up and turn my focus to the VIC-20. There's only 3 screws that hold the VIC-20 together, and they come out very quickly and easily with a standard Phillips head screwdriver. So according to the schematic, there are 2 UAB 6522 VIA interface chips that control the serial, the joystick, and the cassette ports on the VIC-20. So I decided to swap these 2 just to see if it made any difference in the function of the cassette port, and just to isolate and narrow down whether either one of these chips was bad. Unfortunately, swapping those 2 chips did not make any difference, so I decided to dig a little further and go ahead and pull the main board out of the chassis just to take a closer look at everything on it and see if I could figure out anything further with what's going on and why this cassette deck is not receiving that 6 volts. Because without that 6 volts, we're not going to be able to load any programs from cassettes. And in my opinion, it would kind of make the VIC-20 not really worth anything, as a lot of games and a lot of good programs are available for the VIC-20 on cassettes. So we'll dig a little deeper and see what we can find. So after desoldering some of the grounding points, there's an RF shield that's soldered to the PCB, and there's also going to be several screws that we need to remove. So we're going to take our time and slowly pry up these soldered points. We're going to use our pencil soldering iron. Get it really hot to do this. I've got it at 750 watts right now. And, you know, carefully remove the solder points, pry up the little tabs, and eventually you'll get the board off and you'll be able to have access to just the board. There's some more screws involved in actually removing and separating the main PCB board from the RF shield. So carefully take those out. They're Phillips head screws as well, and slowly you'll get the board separated. So the way this works is pin 39 of the second 6522 VIA IC has normally high 5 volts. And when you press the play button on the recorder, that sensing circuit sends that pin low, which then in turn drives the tape drive motor circuit to go high and produce the 6 volts on the output of the cassette port. So this signal seemed to be working okay, so I decided to take a further look at the schematic and realized that that pin 39 drives a 2-transistor circuit that ultimately drives the motor, which is ultimately powered by a fuse, fuse 1. So I decided to take a closer look at fuse 1, and guess what, guys? Lo and behold. Yep, you guessed it, fuse 1 is bad. It's blown. So the moral of the story is always check your fuses first before you start digging into your board. Well, Anyway, it gave me the opportunity to learn a little bit about the motor drive cassette circuitry for the VIC-20, which will be invaluable for future use of the VIC-20 or future troubleshooting of the VIC-20s. So apparently this fuse is directly in line with the 9-volt AC that comes in from the VIC power supply, which is ultimately used to run the accessory ports, the cassette port and the expansion port. So good to know. So here goes a quick check. Let's hit play and see if the recorder actually spins. Hey, we have success. Alright. We're finally getting the 6 volts we need to drive the cassette unit. So that's what it was, that fuse. As simple as it may seem. So now it's time to put the VIC-20 back together, and we're going to basically go through and reverse the steps that we did to take it apart. We're going to solder our points back together on the PCB, and you know the drill. Just take your time, be patient, and everything will go back together just the way it was when we found it. And let's make sure that it powers on after all that. And yes, it does. So there you go. So one thing I realized as I was going to go and try and test the tape is that the actual tape broke somehow during the testing. So I'm going to try and take it apart and splice it back together with some clear Scotch tape, and maybe we can salvage this program, you know, at the end of the day, and see if we can get it to load. So let's see what we can get done with this. So now the real question is, does it work? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's hit play and see if it loads the program. Well, after a few seconds, it did actually find Snakefield. So let's see if it actually loads. Well, after a couple of minutes of loading, I got this out of memory error. Got it twice. I tried it a couple times, so I'm not sure it has something to do with the fact that it says on the tape VIC-20 8K expanded, which means that it might need more RAM than I have in this basic VIC-20, which is 5K. So I don't know. If anybody has any information on this game, Snakefield, it was made by a company out of New York. So I Googled it. I couldn't find it. But anyway, The good news is we got the tape drive unit working, so that's good, and I'm happy about that. So I'll just have to look for a couple more games and programs that we can use to test it out and see how good it works. Let's just take a quick look at Basic, CBM Basic version 2. You have 3.5K roughly bytes free to type in basic programs or write basic programs on the VIC-20. It doesn't sound like a lot of RAM, but believe it or not, there were some very respectable programs written in that 3.5K of memory. And we'll actually showcase some of those programs in a future episode. I actually talked about a 10-line adventure program that was in my other video that was ported from the ZX81 to the Atari 8-bit computers. But Robin from 8-Bit Show and Tell had actually ported the 10-line adventure game from the ZX81 to the VIC-20. You can check out his video. I'll put a link in the description and also at the top here on a card. You can go check his video out where he ported that to the VIC-20. We're just showing what you can do here, changing the text color in BASIC. So anyway, that's it for the BASIC for this episode. It's pretty basic, as you can see. Well, that about wraps it up for the VIC-20. I'm going to have some fun with the computer. I think it's a classic computer. It's a piece of history. It's a great learning tool for anyone who wants to get into some basic programming and just to get their feet wet and how the old computers actually worked. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll come back at some point when I get some more VIC-20 software, and maybe we'll do a top 10 review of the top 10 game or application titles that were ever released for the VIC-20. We can actually see what the software developers were actually able to push the small machine to do. I think we're going to see some cool stuff and some cool games based on what I've seen on the internet for the VIC-20. So anyway, till then, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, give me some comments below. Take care. I'll see you in the next video.